Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we will try to comprehensively analyze 7 articles in 2 different sections, along with the daily mains answer writing program. In the analysis part, we'll first have a discussion regarding the need of having a robust framework with respect to ensuring the judicial accountability in India. Then, in the second article, we'll have a discussion why the government of India is in a mission mode, emphasizing the piped gas supply instead of the LPG. Then, in the prelims pointer section, we'll have a discussion regarding 5 different topics from a special perspective of the upcoming UPSC prelims examination, along with the value addition. So stay tuned. Come on to the very first topic of today's discussion. This is with respect to judicial accountability in India. India as a state, it has 3 organs. We have the legislature, we have the executive, and we have the judiciary, right? And in India, we don't follow a strict separation of power. We don't follow a rigid separation of power. What we follow is a system of checks and balance. What does it mean? Let's say if any organ of the state, be it the executive, if it is trying to breach its limit, if it is trying to breach its scope of power, its jurisdiction, we'll have the other organs of the state coming and trying to control it. Or if the judiciary is trying to do something, the executive and the legislature would try to control it. That is what is known as a system of checks and balance. Moreover, what you have to understand is, in India, we have the executive, which is the part and parcel of the legislature. That is what you'll have to understand. If you look at the overall picture of the functioning of the state, what you would notice is that the executive and the legislature are subjected to various forms of accountability. Again, I'm repeating. If you look at the overall structure or the functioning of the state, what you would notice is the executive and the legislature are subjected to various forms of accountability. For example, let's talk about the executive. We have the Council of Ministers. And Article 75 of the Indian Constitution very clearly says that the Council of Ministers are collectively responsible to the Lok Sabha. As long as they command the majority in the lower house, they stay in power. We have other mechanisms also: question hour, 0 hour, debates and discussions, scrutiny by the parliamentary committees. So there is a constant check on the working of the executive. Similarly, once we talk about the legislature, it is accountable to the people. Normally, after every 5 years, we have the general elections. So they have to be accountable to the people. But what about judiciary? If you look at the overall functioning of the state, you would notice is that the judiciary lacks the accountability framework or lacks the required accountability framework. And what is the very basis of this discussion today? That we are witnessing a lot of cases where judiciary has shrugged off its responsibility as far as the overall accountability is concerned. Why? Simple fact that generally it is believed that the principle of judicial accountability, judicial transparency, judicial integrity is often antithetical, is often opposite to that of judicial independence. What generally commentators say is that if you want the judiciary to be independent, you cannot let the judiciary to be accountable to the executive or to the parliament. Because then the executive or the parliament would try to control the judiciary. And its decisions, the decisions of the judiciary would be compromised. By ultimately, what is the very rationale of judiciary? What is the main objective? What judiciary does? It is conflict resolution. And in many cases, what we have seen is that the government is also a litigant. The government is also a party to a case. So if the government has a control over the judiciary, definitely the decisions of the judiciary would be compromised. They would be in favor of the government. That is what many commentators say, who basically put forward the idea of judicial independence. But there's a need to have a robust framework of judicial accountability. Because what recently we have seen in many cases, for example, the controversy surrounding Justice Yashwant Verma of Delhi High Court previously, what we saw that there was a hoard of cash which was seen. There was a fire breakout in his house, and what we observed was that there were a lot of cash over there. Similarly, we have had other cases where many of the judges, especially at the high courts, they have publicly called for communal ideas. They've talked about communal ideas in their judgments. And in a recent case, what we have seen is with respect to the NCRT, one of the NCRT books talked about the aspects of judicial corruption, and that was not taken in a good light by the Supreme Court. Supreme Court clearly said that remove this chapter. It says that this in one way is a contempt of the court. That is also one of the aspects. The author in this particular column says that we need to balance this aspect. People cannot go for the contempt of the court, disregard the authority of the court. At the same time, the free speech must be emphasized, must be given importance, and there has to be a balance. So we'll talk about the need of having a robust judicial accountability framework. One of the most important topics as far as the GS2 is concerned with respect to the judiciary. And we'll try to go into all aspects that what this judicial accountability is, what are the reasons, what is the need of having a judicial accountability framework, a robust framework, what are the challenges and what should be the way forward. Believe me, it's going to be a very comprehensive discussion. So let's start. First of all, let's see that what is judicial accountability. What do we mean by judicial accountability? It is that mechanism, it is that framework which basically tries to make sure that the judges and the courts, they are responsible in their conduct, responsible with respect to their decision making, and not just professionally but also personally, so that we have trust in the overall legal system, in the overall justice delivery system. So it is that mechanism or that framework which the judiciary should adopt in order to entrust that feeling of trust in the minds of the people as far as judiciary is concerned, right? And what you'll have to understand is that this accountability framework, it must balance the independence and integrity. We already discussed that. Because the very notion of independence, it sometimes is in a direct conflict with the aspects of integrity. What the judiciary has said time and again, especially the Supreme Court, is that we cannot have a very transparent and clear picture. Because if that would be so, then there would be the infringement of the executive and the legislature in our functioning, and we cannot allow that. In a very famous case, the former Chief Justice of India, he said with respect to the RTI, the right to information, that transparency cannot be used to destruct the institution of judiciary. That was his words. That transparency cannot be used to destruct the very aspect or very framework of judiciary. So that is what you'll have to understand. But we'll have to balance this aspect of independence and that of integrity, impartiality, and transparency, right? Judiciary in India, it is not subjected to, we already discussed that, it is not subjected to the same level of accountability as we have for the executive and the legislature. Judiciary has often shielded itself. Very important words you can use in your answer. It has often shielded itself with respect to the aspect of judicial independence. And that in many cases, what it leads to is the possible misuse of power. If you would not allow the people to know what is going on in judiciary, what it would lead to is opacity. People would not be aware of what is really happening. And that would also affect the decision making. That can lead to corruption, misuse of office, misuse of power. So therefore, a proper framework of accountability is important to that limit that it does not affect the independence aspect, right? So let's also have a look at this infographic which talks about that what are the various features of judicial accountability. The very first is upholding the law. We often talk about the rule of law. Rule of law, a very important concept given by A.B. Dicey, British jurist. So once we are talking about the rule of law, judges are also equal. They are as equal as the other people. They cannot have a privileged position. We have Article 14, equality before law and equal protection of laws. If the executive and the legislature are subjected to the accountability framework, why not the judiciary? It should be subjected to a particular framework, right? Ensuring judges adhere to the legal standards and principles. We have, for example, the ethical standards. You guys are preparing for the paper 4, ethics paper. Why? Because it is expected that the future civil servants who would join the services, they should have a robust ethical framework within them. So it is also, the same thing applies to the judiciary as well. We have the conduct of services rules, the conduct of all India services rules for the civil servants, right? Ensuring justice, guaranteeing fair and impartial administration of justice. This is also very important, because if there is lack of accountability framework, this is going to affect in one way or the other the decision making of the judiciary. So that is what you will have to understand. Because if judiciary is not really answerable to the people, or if it does not follow any kind of accountability framework, there would be the cases increasing. There would be an increase in the backlogs of the cases. The case loads would increase, and judiciary would not have any incentive or any push to reform itself. Right? Let's talk about promoting transparency, enhancing openness and clarity in judicial processes. Let's talk about, for the example's sake, the appointments process. The appointment of judges to the High Courts and the Supreme Court. The process is entirely in the ambit of the judiciary, in the ambit of the Supreme Court. Executive and legislature effectively has no role in that. And the proceedings of the collegium, they are not subjected to public disclosure. Again, I am repeating. Whatever goes inside the meetings of the collegium, that body of judges which decides upon the appointments and transfer of judges, it is not subjected to public disclosure. It depends upon their will, that what information is to be disclosed. So that is also one of the very important aspects. Maintaining public trust, building confidence in the integrity of the judiciary. When people would see, people after every 5 years, they vote in the elections, general elections. So there is the accountability framework set. Basis which party gets more number of seats or secures the majority, that forms the government. And then the executive, the council of ministers are regularly subjected to the scrutiny by the parliament. Fine. But what about judiciary? There is no mechanism. Judges are unelected people. How would you enforce that accountability framework? Again, as I've said this before, the analysis part is to make you understand the nitty-gritties of the topic. It's not just about to finish the topic in one go, right? Without even talking about the very basics of the issues. So let's try to understand each and every aspect of it, so that even if a question comes from an adjoining area, you can easily solve it, right? Building confidence in the integrity of the judiciary. So if people have trust, if people have this notion in the mind that yes, our judiciary is transparent, our judiciary is not suffering from the ailments or the malice of corruption, so they would have more trust in the system, right? Safeguarding the rule of law, protecting the legal principles and individual rights. Ultimately, we have the Supreme Court as a guarantor of the fundamental rights of the people. If we have any of the person whose fundamental rights are abridged, what is that article? We have Article 32, right to constitutional remedies, what Dr. Ambedkar said, that this is the most important article in the Constitution. If anyone's fundamental rights are abridged or infringed, that person has a right to go directly to the Supreme Court for the enforcement of fundamental rights. So therefore, people would have more trust in the judiciary if it follows a proper, transparent framework, proper accountability framework. Current framework, what is the framework we have as of now? If you talk about the removal of judges, the first thing which you'll have to understand is that we often see people speaking or using the word impeachment of judges. The word impeachment in the Constitution of India is only used for the president. Impeachment of the president. We have Article 61, which talks about the procedure with respect to the impeachment. Once we are talking about the judges of the Supreme Court and the judges of the High Courts, we use the word removal. Same thing goes with the vice president. Same thing goes with the speaker, removal. The word impeachment is only with respect to the president. Once we talk about the removal of the judges of Supreme Court and High Courts, we have Article 124 and we have Article 217, subclause 1, subclause B, which talks about the removal aspect. And then we also have the Judiciary Inquiry, Judges Inquiry Act of 1968, which basically talks about the procedure which is to be adopted. And what the procedure says, procedure talks about these things, that the motion can be initiated, the motion with respect to the removal of any of the Supreme Court judge or any of the High Court judges can be initiated in the Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha. And in Lok Sabha, it requires 100 members, support of 100 members. In Rajya Sabha, it requires support of 50 members. It can either be accepted or rejected by the presiding officer, that is the speaker or the chairman in case of Rajya Sabha. After that, once it is accepted, what the speaker or what the chairman or what the presiding officer would do is, he would set up a particular committee, inquiry committee, comprising of the Supreme Court judge, Chief Justice of a High Court, and as distinguished jurist. This committee would investigate the charges. If it finds not guilty, the case is closed. If it finds guilty, we'll have the house, that particular house, either Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha, it has to first pass this motion with special majority of the total membership and that of the 2/3 present and voting. Then the other house would pass with the special majority. And once it is passed by both the houses, you will have the president order removing that particular judge from that particular day. But the irony is that this procedure has not been used or has not manifested in the removal of any of the judges. We had in 93 a particular case against Judge V. Ramaswamy, but the ruling party did not support it. And it basically, the procedure failed. That's the only one case which we had. So that is what you'll have to understand. Only one proceeding, and that too failed. Justice V. Ramaswamy, right? As I told you, we have the Judges Inquiry Act and the other aspect, for example, the in-house procedure, we'll talk about that. The investigative procedure, the procedure with respect to how the things would be carried out. Once we're talking about the removal of judges, as far as 124 subclause 4 and 217 subclause 1 subclause B talks about. We have the Judges Inquiry Act. Then we have Article 235. What does Article 235 says? It talks about the control of the respective high courts on the subordinate courts. So this, in one way or the other, it is an effective mechanism through which the high courts, respective high courts, can have a control over the subordinate courts, right? Then we have Restatement of Values of Judicial Life, 1997. Now, this was basically a charter. It was a voluntary list of items which basically talked about that what should be the conduct of judges. And they were, in one way or the other, the restatement of pre-existing and universally accepted norms, guidelines, procedures, not something very unique. And later it was adopted by all the high courts. Again, this was voluntary in nature, right? Then we have in-house procedure. We had a very important case of Ravi Chandran Iyer versus A.M. Bhattacharjee, 1995. Ravi Chandran Iyer versus A.M. Bhattacharjee. In this particular case, the Supreme Court talked about the idea of having the in-house committee. What is in-house committee? That we would not want others to interfere. We would constitute our own in-house committee comprising the judges, and then we would look into the matters of misconduct. One thing more which I'll have to talk about here is that once we talk about Article 124 and 217, what are the grounds of removal? It's proved misbehavior and incapacity or incapacity. It's proved misbehavior or incapacity. So only for these two grounds you can have the removal of the judges. So we had the in-house procedure, and in 1999 the judges themselves talked about this, that we would have our own procedure with respect to investigating or looking on a particular issue. And if we find that the issue is serious, issue is of grave nature, we would recommend the removal, obviously to the parliament. So it took this particular thing in its own ambit. Then we have the other aspect of Judicial Standards and Accountability Bill. This basically Lok Sabha passed it, but it lapsed. So ultimately what we're trying, and this talked about the National Judicial Oversight Committee. National Judicial Oversight Committee. This particular bill, Judicial Standards and Accountability Bill. But it ultimately lapsed. So these are the frameworks. These are the frameworks which we have as of now, or which we talked about, right? But what is the need to enhance judicial accountability in India? Bhai, zarurat kya hai? What is the need? See, the very first is that judges are there to deliver verdicts, to deliver the orders, to decide on a particular case. And quality matters, that what is the kind of judgment which is being given by the court, be it the high courts, we're talking about the higher judiciary or the Supreme Court. So if we will have a proper accountability framework, the judges would be under a constant gaze of the people. They would be in one way more accountable to the people itself. They would be concerned about their actions. They would be more cognizant of what actions they take, more aware of what they do. So this would usher in quality judgments and permeate justice in society. Because once judiciary would be more active, by active I don't mean to say the overreach. By active I mean to say that once they become more answerable, once they follow a proper accountability framework, it would lead to better quality judgment. And this would permeate the principles of justice in the society, right? For example, let me give you an example. We had one of the judges of Bombay High Court who was looking into a particular case of POCSO, Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act, Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act 2012. And what he said was a very insensitive thing, which many critics said later, that this was very insensitive. What he said was that if a particular child is groped without skin-to-skin contact and the intent of sexual activity, without the intent of skin-to-skin contact and the intent of sexual activity, that cannot be termed as an offense. So this was seen in a very bad light, that what about the children? What about their bodily integrity? So we have had judgments of these kinds. So if we'll have a proper framework, such type of judgments would not be there. Then we have augmenting the public trust and ensuring the impartial functioning. Very, very important aspect of public trust. How would the normal people, how would the citizens trust the judiciary if we'll have cases of harassment? Former Chief Justice of India, there were allegations of harassment with respect to one of the former Chief Justice of India. And later he was given a ticket in the Rajya Sabha. He became a member of the Rajya Sabha. And if you look at what is or what has been his performance as a Rajya Sabha member, it's pathetic. He has not even participated, not even asked one question. So that is the kind of quality which we have. So if we'll have these instances of harassment or anything, the trust of the people in the judiciary would erode, right? Huge backlog of cases, because judiciary, they take, if you must be aware of the vacations. We have the High Court judges and the Supreme Court judges who take long vacations. And you already know what is the condition of pendency. And this data is from 3rd of January 2025. It's a data which is almost more than 1 year old. And look at the pendency. Total cases which are pending in the district courts, around 4 crores. Total case pending in around high courts, around 62 lakhs. And total case pending in the Supreme Court, around 83,000. This is the pendency which we have. Pendency of cases. Because there is no accountability framework. Whom are the judges accountable? Who would judge the judges? So that is what you'll have to understand. Absence of any accountability, inadequate existing mechanisms. See, as I told you, we have the Judges Enquiry Act or the in-house procedure. Pehli baat, the very first thing is the Judges Enquiry Act. It has no timelines. The procedure is not time-bound. Let's talk about Justice Yashwant Verma. The matter has been pending. There is no action which has been taken. The constitution of committee, the inquiry committee and the other things, the procedural aspect, there is no time-bound action which is being taken on these aspects. Then in-house procedures. In-house procedures, what you'll have to understand is that it is not subjected to any of the scrutiny outside, from the outside. It is totally a process which is shielded from the outside interventions. As it says, in-house procedure. So these are some of the very important aspects. Balancing judicial independence and accountability. Judicial independence is fine. We need to have the judiciary independent. But what about accountability? In the guise of having judicial independence, you can't just say that you are not responsible or you won't follow the aspects of transparency or integrity or accountability. Absolute autonomy of the judiciary may result in abuse of power, may result in abuse of that particular office, may result in corruption, right? Then we have preventing corruption and misconduct, especially once you look at the lower courts, subordinate judiciary. You must have seen there are allegations that many of these judges, they take money and then adjourn the case for years. Adjournments have been done. The court is adjourned. The case is adjourned. So, and this favors the powerful. So, in a way, the justice delivery system is serving the interests of the elites. We have people, you must have seen what happened in that Kanpur case. We had one of the person who was driving a very luxury car. What happened? These people get bail within hours. What about the common man? Because it is the elites and there is corruption involved, right? Scope of RTI. We had one of the very important frameworks with respect to RTI as far as transparency is concerned. But what about its application in the judiciary? It's limited. We had one of the very important cases of Supreme Court of India versus Subhash Chandra Agarwal in 2019, in which it was very clearly said that the office of the Chief Justice of India, it's a public office as far as the definition of RTI is concerned. But there were certain exceptions. What it said was that with respect to the administrative functions of the Supreme Court, we would give you the information. But as far as the judicial aspect is concerned, the information would not be disclosed. What the collegium is doing, we will not disclose. What the assets of judges are, we will not disclose. So there are still many restrictions on the ambit of the usage of the RTI with respect to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court is also working for the people, right? It is an instrument of the state. So it has to be transparent. No obligation to prepare the annual reports. We have the ministries, we have various ministries, Agriculture Ministry, Home Ministry. Every ministry prepares an annual report so as to show that what all actions have been taken in the last 1 year, or what have been the achievements. What are the areas where we would work? What about Supreme Court? There is no binding aspect with respect to the Supreme Court to publish the annual reports, or even the high courts. Only few high courts publish the annual reports. So there is no transparency. Then we have global shift towards judicial transparency. You talk about UK, you talk about USA. Over there, what we have seen is that there are oversight committees to look into the cases of possible corruption or misuse of power by the judges. And these oversight officers, they have the investigation power. So this, to a great degree, has led to transparency in the judiciary, right? But what are the potential risks involved with respect to enforcing judicial accountability? Aapne bol diya, you have said that we need to have judicial accountability and transparency. Executive and the legislature must have certain aspects to control the judiciary. But what about the decisions then? The very first is threat to judicial independence. Yes, it is also one of the very grave aspects. Because if the balance tilts in favor of any one of them, there has to be a perfect balance between judicial accountability and judicial independence. Because if the accountability would be increased, if the judiciary would be made more accountable to the legislature and the executive, the decisions would be more politicized. The decisions would be more in favor of the government. We have this issue of quid pro quo. You must be aware of these words. Quid pro quo. You do something for me today, and once you will retire, I'll do something for you. I'll make you the governor. Quid pro quo. So this is what is happening in the judiciary. So if you have the control of the executive or the legislature over the judiciary, it might compromise the judicial independence. For example, we have had the case of Lokpal. Lokpal was also something which was politicized. And it was said that Lokpal would have a jurisdiction including that of Supreme Court. Supreme Court later stayed that particular thing. So this is what you'll have to understand. Political interference in judiciary. Why was this particular motion, removal motion of Justice V. Ramaswamy failed? Because the ruling government abstained from voting. So there were politics involved with respect to this particular judge, right? Then we have discourage bold and independent judgments. If you will have the government of the day and the legislature controlling the judiciary would not be in a position to come up with bold judgments. By politics mein bolte hai na, we often say political will is required. Why don't leaders take strong decisions? Because they are afraid that it might compromise the interests of the people. Political will is not there. Similarly, if judiciary would always be in that constant threat of being surveilled, of being looked by the executive and the legislature, so they would not pass those decisions which are really important for the nations. It would affect the decision making. Lack of uniform standards. Bhai, you have come up with the in-house procedures, theek hai? But are they uniform? Is there a statutory basis? Is there a law? No. So these are the aspects which you'll have to understand. Now, what should be the way forward as far as the accountability is concerned? The very first is National Judicial Oversight Committee. What we can have is, for example, in this particular bill which we talked about, Judicial Standards and Accountability Bill, it talked about National Judicial Oversight Committee. We can have such type of committee. And if the judiciary is really concerned about the membership, let's have the membership as retired judges. We have legal luminaries, experts in legal domain. We have some of the best lawyers in the country. Why not include them? Distinguished jurists. And on the basis of this particular committee, this would investigate and then decision can be taken by the parliament. But it has to be a time-bound procedure. Okay. Next aspect is, we have already covered this, reform the removal and inquiry process. As I said, that if you can't go with this, the very first suggestion, you already have the Judges Inquiry Act. Why not come with strict timelines, impose timelines on that, so that people have trust in the system. Okay. Next is mandate the public disclosure of judicial assets. Right now, we have this thing where many of the judges, especially the Supreme Court judges, they come up with their assets and they say that we are declaring assets with respect to what our families have, even the near and dear ones. This is not a charity which you are doing. This is not something, which you are doing which should actually not be done on a voluntary basis. There should be a mandatory disclosure of assets. By you are delivering some of the biggest decisions. You are taking decisions with respect to some of the most important areas as far as the legal aspect is concerned. So you should automatically disclose, or you should be mandated to disclose your assets and also of your family and near and dear ones. Statutory requirement. Expand the e-courts and digital case management. We already have the National Judicial Data Grid. So why not? And it's performing in a very good way. But why not expand this thing so that and even at the district level, so that what is the caseload with respect to a particular district court? What is, and even the high courts and the Supreme Court, what is the pendency level? How many cases this particular judge has resolved? What is the quality of judgment? There should be a dashboard, so we can expand that. Effective implementation of RTI in judiciary. See, as long as if there's a matter which compromises, if there's a question in the RTI which compromises the independence of the judiciary, it's fine. But for the other aspects, the decisions, the information should be disclosed. Then we have publication of annual reports, one of the most important aspects. At least there would be an element of trust in the minds of people. Ki bhai, at least after every 1 year, we have these annual reports which are published by the judiciary, be it the Supreme Court or the High Courts. What was done in the last 1 year? What has been the quality of judgments? What all judgments have been declared? And that would also serve as the way, as a performance appraisal system for the judges, considering the quality of judgments which have been delivered. Then we have review of contempt of court, as the article talks about. That, see, this is something, contempt of court. Most of the democratic countries around the world, they have actually removed this. Take, for example, UK. It has removed this contempt of court. Why? Because this broadens the very ambit of the court. Anything can be seen as a contempt to the court, that this is disregarding the authority. But there was a chapter in the NCRT which talked about the corruption. We study about corruption in the bureaucracy. So why can't we study about corruption in judiciary? That was struck down. So this is a very insensitive and immature approach, right? So not everything can be taken as a contempt of court. That's what we are talking about. Allow constructive criticism, because that is the very basis of a democracy. And as one of the students very famously said, that judges are not gods. Judges are not gods. They cannot just say whatever they want. The judiciary is also subjected to the same principles which the executive and the legislature abides by, right? Performance review system. We have the collegium with respect to the appointment and transfer of judges with respect to the Supreme Court and the High Courts. What about the functioning of the collegium? What about the performance review? On what basis the collegium is selecting appointing judges to the High Court and the Supreme Court. Because what we have seen is the cases of nepotism. We had former Justice Arun Mishra of Supreme Court. His brother was appointed in the High Court, in one of the High Courts as judges. So I'm not questioning the the credibility or the aspects of his intellect. But there are allegations of nepotism in the judiciary. So this is what you'll have to understand, right? Also, once we talk about the gender diversity, that is not there. Judiciary under Lokpal. Yes, this can be thought. If with proper checks, judiciary can also be included within the overall ambit of Lokpal. Why? Because it has been done in a country like Sweden. And that's the reason we say these Scandinavian countries, they perform very good as far as the aspects of zero corruption are concerned, as far as the aspects of transparency are concerned. Over there, the judiciary falls under the overall ambit of the ombudsman in Sweden. Then we have appointments and transfer. We had the National Judicial Appointments Commission, the 99th Constitutional Amendment Act. That was struck down by the Supreme Court. But what after that? You cannot just continue with the collegium system forever, because this is not transparent. This is opaque. So we'll have to come up with a new system, obviously in concurrence with the judiciary. But this is a necessity, what you'll have to understand. So what we are saying is, see, as one of the organs of the state, it is indispensable that judiciary comes on its own with more robust accountability framework, so that the people naturally develop the respect or trust as far as judiciary is concerned. And there is no doubt, judiciary, since especially once we talk about what all decisions it has given after independence, many of the decisions, they have really protected. They have protected the fundamental rights of the people. The judiciary has acted as a bulwark against the arbitrary infringement by the state, by the executive. But we'll have to come up with certain accountability principles. That is what you'll have to understand, right? Let's have a mains practice question which says, the higher judiciary in India enjoys significant independence, but concerns regarding transparency and accountability persist. Discuss the importance of judicial accountability and highlight some of the challenges. So we have, see, this is also one of the aspects which I really want to discuss. People have issues in finding that what are the requirements of the question. The question says the higher judiciary in India enjoys significant independence, but concerns regarding transparency and accountability persist. So we'll first talk about that what is the framework of judicial accountability and what are the issues, right? So this is going to be the first part of it. Then the second part of the answer, the body, would be discuss the importance. What is the importance of having a robust judicial accountability framework? And also it talks about the challenges. So the third part of the question would be about the challenges. Issues, you can basically, you can talk about the challenges itself. So over here, what we can do is we can talk about the introduction part with what judicial accountability is, and talk about in a flowchart kind of thing that what is the importance, right? Next, we'll talk about in the fourth part as a way forward, because it's asking, suggest a way forward. That is how the body of the answer has to be broken. And finally, you will give a conclusion. Please understand, the conclusion, the way forward is not a part of the conclusion. It's a part of the body, right? So do try to answer this, because answering is only the way through which you can significantly improve your chances of qualifying the examination. And yes, if you're liking the initiative, do not forget to press the like button and also let us know in the comments. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is about why is India pushing for the supply of the piped gas instead of the LPG, liquefied petroleum gas. In order to answer this, what we'll have to understand is the crisis which we are witnessing in the West Asia. So we already know that West Asia is in a state of turmoil, chaos, confusion, war. We have Israel and US on one side fighting against Iran. As a tactic, what Iran has done is it has taken a full control of Strait of Hormuz. Strait of Hormuz, which is between Iran and that of Oman. And this is one of the most important critical sea lines of communication as far as the supply of global crude oil, major chunk of the global crude oil and natural gas is concerned, or the other aspects are concerned. And once you have the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, it is affecting India, a country like India the most, where we are critically dependent on the imports. So in one of the sessions in the Analyst, we also discussed about these aspects of supply chain. So as a kind of a measure which the government is thinking upon is that why not we increase the supply of the natural gas instead of the liquefied petroleum gas, piped natural gas, PNG. You must have seen we have the pipelines which basically enter the houses as far as the cooking needs are concerned. Right? And we also have, on the other hand, the LPG cylinders. So the government is trying to focus more upon the PNG, trying to expand more of the PNG as far as the LPG is concerned. And there are various reasons. First reason, what you'll have to understand is the most important reason is that we have good amount of domestic sources as far as the natural gas is concerned. And our sources of the natural gas, they are also more diversified. But once we talk about the LPG, there is very less of domestic production. And sources are also not diversified. Most of it, it's actually dependent upon the West Asian route. That's the Strait of Hormuz. So this is what you'll have to understand. Possibly a question with respect to GS3 energy can be asked, that what is the need to broaden the scope of the distribution of CGDs, very important word, city gas distribution networks. Remember this, right? So let's talk about the context. We have as of now almost 33 crore LPG connections in India. 33 crore LPG connections. But the government is trying to give an impetus, trying to focus on expanding the PNG, piped natural gas, not the LPG. Reasons I've already told you. That we are critically dependent on the imports as far as the petroleum gas is concerned, liquefied petroleum gas, LPG. LPG is nothing. It is basically a mix of the propane and butane, whereas the piped natural gas, it primarily comprises of CH4, methane. Right? So this is LPG's family, propane and butane. Some elements of propylene and butylene are also there. Right? Let's discuss the types of fuel. We have the LPG derived from the crude oil refining and natural gas processing. It primarily is stored in cylinders at high pressure, right? And it is used for household cooking. And primarily it comprises of propane and butane. Remember this, LPG, petroleum gas, comprised of propane and butane primarily. Then we have LNG, natural gas which is cooled at minus 160 degrees Celsius, known as cryogenic cooling, sub-zero temperatures. Once you cool the natural gas at this temperature, it substantially reduces in its volume, and it can be large amount of gas in its liquefied form can be stored in a smaller volume if you store it cryogenically sub-zero temperatures. So this is also an energy intensive process because this would require a lot of energy for the refrigeration part, right? Volume is reduced to almost 1,000 times, transported via the special LNG carriers. We have different LNG carriers. You must have seen the big vessels carrying the LNG, right? Let's talk about the CNG. As the name says, CNG, which is compressed. It is not liquefied. It is compressed to almost 200 to 250 kilograms per centimeter square. Mainly used as vehicle fuels. We have the cars running on CNG. We have the buses running on CNG. So it's compressed gas. It's not liquefied, right? PNG supplied through the pipelines. We have the pipelines entering the homes. Considered a cleaner and a continuous fuel source. Because we have the feedstocks, we have the pipelines, trunk lines, and they supply these junctions, and these junctions then supply to various houses. So there's a continuous supply. Once we talk about the LPG, it's stored in the cylinders. It's easier as far as the last mile delivery is concerned. Interiors part, remote corners. Let's talk about the hilly terrain. Imagine in your mind. Let's talk about northeastern part of the country. Over there, the terrain is very ups and downs. It's not really easy to construct or to come up with the pipelines. So we are focusing more now on the urban areas, which are mostly in the plain regions, to expand the city gas distribution network, piped natural gas. But the benefit of LPG is that it has the good last mile delivery. Import dependent, primarily import dependent, right? Petroleum gas. Then let's talk about the natural gas. We have the pipelines, requires heavy infrastructure. Imagine, obviously, that we have a lot of iron which is used in the pipelines. So this requires a very heavy infrastructure to get those pipelines in each and every household. It's a very humongous task. It's a very big task. Can diversify the sources as far as the natural gas is concerned, because we are importing from the US also, right? Why the shift from LPG to PNG? Because as far as the LPG is concerned, 60% of it is imported, and almost 90% is via the Strait of Hormuz, where we are witnessing a huge crisis, where we are witnessing a geopolitical crunch, chaos, conflict. Iran has taken a complete control over the Strait of Hormuz, right? Natural gas, the imports are more diversified, right? Then we have energy security concerns. Once we have conflict, we are not even a party to the war, and look how badly it is affecting. It is affecting the supply of crude oil, it is affecting the supply of gas, it is affecting the very households, the very kitchens of the Indian households. So that is what the globalization, the ill effects of globalization is also about. And you can just quote it down. Not the ill effect, but what, obviously it's an ill effect as far as India is concerned. But implications of globalization. We have paper 1. This is a topic, very important topic of paper 1. So you can quote it down. Supply disruptions. LNG has multiple global suppliers, efficiency and substitutability. So we have PNG, which can replace LPG for the cooking. Very easily we can do that. And then we have comparable energy output for domestic use. So as far as the overall energy output is concerned, it's not much difference, right? Then what is the government push? The targets are that we would have almost 12 crore PNG by the year 2034. As of now, we have around 1.5 crores, mostly in the urban centers. And we want to increase it to almost 12 crore PNG connections. Measures what the government is taking, we are expanding the CGD networks, city gas distribution networks, pipeline network. As of now, it's almost 25,000 and almost 10,500 is under construction. Policy push, faster approvals are being given at the central level, and it has been mandated by the central government to the states that make sure that you give faster approvals. And also we have mandatory shift. That is, those people who are having the LPG connections, they would now shift to the PNG. And no person would be allowed to have both these sources. They would be penalized. Actions would be taken if anyone is having both these connections. You can just use one of them. Key challenges, the very first is infrastructure gaps. See, pipeline network is something which is not easy. And this is obviously uneven, especially once you look at the more developed parts of the country. The northern part and the western part, they have a dominance of these networks, not the eastern or the central or the northeastern part. So it's uneven. Then we have many areas are not connected to the trunk pipelines, the main pipelines which supply to that of the CGDs. And ultimately we have the households. So there is absence of trunk pipelines. Even when we can work on CGDs, the pipelines which are there in the cities, the trunk pipelines are not there, the feeder routes are not there. Then we have last mile connectivity. We have the urban congestion. You have the approvals which are not given by the city administration. Then we have the permissions, land issues. Then almost in 90 CGD areas, we have the connection which is disconnected because approvals have not been given. We are ready with the layout, but approvals are not been given. Then we have supply constraint. To support almost 13 crore connections, there is a need to increase 33% of the domestic production of the natural gas. So we would need to increase. If you are saying that we have to increase it to 13 crore to support 13 crore connections, what we would need is that there would be a 33% increase required in the overall production of the LNG, natural gas. And this would be dependent on the ONGC production, Oil and Natural Gas Corporation, or the LNG imports. Again, this would be a cost on the overall foreign exchange. Then competing demands. What you'll have to understand is the natural gas in India, it is used for many purposes. For example, we have fertilizers, production of fertilizers, which is again a very important input as far as agriculture is concerned. Then we have the power, then we have industry. So if you have this much amount of LNG, for example, and right now we have this much amount which is going in industries, and this much is going in households, piped natural gas. So if you're going to increase the supply to the households, these industries may get compromised until unless you increase the overall production. So you'll have to also keep in mind the other industries, right? Then we have shortage and supply system risks. For example, once we talk about the LNG system, it's a more just-in-time supply. Whatever you are producing, you are supplying. If you want to store, you need to have big storage systems. But we don't have that kind of storage capacity which other countries have. For example, EU. EU has invested a lot as far as the storage capacity of LNG is concerned. We have good storage capacity as far as crude oil is concerned. We have the strategic petroleum reserves in Visakhapatnam, Padur and Mangaluru, almost contributing to almost 5.4 million metric tons of capacity. But we don't have the adequate capacity as far as LNG is concerned. So that is also an issue. Then we have industrial transition issues. We have many of the MSMEs, micro, small and medium enterprises, very small enterprises, who still use the LPG, liquefied petroleum gas, for welding purposes, cutting, heating purposes. How would you make the transition? How would you switch? How would you make those people aware? You would need to invest a lot in awareness, technical adaptation. You'll have to tell those people who are working in these domains that you'll have to shift to this particular thing. And that would also require some technical inputs. Right. What is the ground reality? See, even by 2034, the PNG connections at the present rate, we have almost 18% CAGR, compound annual growth rate of the expansion of the CGD networks, expansion of piped natural gas. What is the rate of the expansion? It's almost 18% compound annual growth rate. What is required is almost 24%, right, in order to achieve the target. Even if we go by the present pace, we'll have only 12 crore connections. It's still almost 20 crore connections would be of the LPG. LPG would still remain significant. So we'll have to import LPG even at that point of time, and also the natural gas. So we'll have to come up with effective solutions. We'll have to make sure that the approvals are given in a timely manner, especially by the state governments and the respective cities, so that there is proper expansion of CGD's network, right? And also we'll have to focus on making sure that we diversify our sources to maximum possible extent. We cannot just be dependent on one particular geography. We cannot have a single geography risk, right? Let's have a mains practice question, a very simple 10 marker. India's push towards piped natural gas is driven by the concerns of energy security and import dependence. Examine the feasibility of replacing the LPG with PNG in India and highlighting the associated challenges and policy measures required. 10 markers. So just try to do this, because writing is the only way to see your name in the list, right? Let's go to the next section. Coming to the prelims pointer section, we have the very first topic which talks about the Artemis II mission, which has taken off, which has used the SLS system, Space Launch System, one of the most powerful carriers, rocket carriers as far as NASA is concerned. And it is using the Orion crew, the capsule, in which you have these 4 astronauts. What you'll have to understand is that Artemis II is just a flyby mission. The astronauts are not going to land on the moon. They would just fly by and then come back to the Earth. So again, very important. NASA began fueling its moon rocket Wednesday for humanity's first lunar trip in more than half a century, aiming for an evening liftoff with 4 astronauts. 3 Americans and 1 Canadian will fly around the moon without stopping or even orbiting, then head straight back towards Pacific splashdown. So please note that they would go and then come back. It's not a mission where they would land on the moon. This can be asked in the prelims. They will set a new distance record for the farthest humans have traveled from the Earth, as they zoom some 6,400 kilometers beyond the moon and then hang a U-turn. Astronauts last flew to the moon during the Apollo 17 in 1972. Artemis II is the opening shot of NASA's grand plans for a permanent moon base. So the US agency's NASA, is now aiming for setting up a base on the moon. And this is the very first step of it. NASA's, and these are the 4 astronauts you can just see, and this is the SLS system, Space Launch System, along with and this is the Orion crew, and we'll talk about that, right, in which you have the astronauts. NASA's Artemis II mission will send 4 astronauts on a 10-day journey around the moon, marking the first human mission to the moon's vicinity since 1972, after the Apollo 2nd. The mission is a flyby and will not land on the moon. A future mission planned for 2028 aims to land astronauts on the lunar surface. NASA has unveiled a long-term roadmap to establish permanent human presence on the moon, aiming to support frequent and extended astronaut stays over the next decade. This marks a shift from short visits to sustained exploration. The plans come alongside the preparation for the Artemis II mission, which will send the astronauts around the moon and mark humanity's return to the lunar space more than after 50 years. Unlike the Apollo missions, which focus on brief landings, the new objective is long-term habitation. The Artemis program is central to this effort. Artemis I 2022 tested an uncrewed mission around the moon. Artemis II will carry, and it has already carried now, it's in the process, on a similar path, followed by another test mission and a planned human moon landing in 2028. NASA aims for regular lunar missions every 6 months involving international partners and private companies. This is the Orion spacecraft which I was talking about, the crew, the module in which you have the 4 astronauts. If you can just have a look, you can just see that this is a breakup of this particular module. The Artemis II mission will reach Moon's vicinity in 3-4 days, similar to the Apollo missions. More than 50 years ago, America's Apollo missions made history when the first people set foot on the lunar surface. In contrast, recent uncrewed missions like Chandrayaan-3 took weeks and months. Why? Because our fuel was very sustainable, right? But more fuel-efficient routes. Faster travel requires more powerful rockets. Artemis II uses NASA's Space Launch System, SLS. And this is the SLS I am again telling. It has these 2 modules and the one central module, right? Thrusters. Currently, its most powerful rocket with Apollo missions use the Saturn V, the most powerful ever built. Both SLS rocket and Orion spacecraft are relatively new and were first tested in the uncrewed Artemis I mission in 2022, which lasted for about 25 days. Artemis II marks the first time these systems will carry astronauts on the lunar mission. Artemis II flight path. So we have the entry. We have starting launch from the NASA's Kennedy Space Center, and then lunar flyby, and then flung into the space, and then you have the coming back. The Artemis II mission will first orbit the Earth twice before heading towards the moon. It will circle the moon and travel up to 6,500 kilometers beyond its far side, marking the farthest distance humans have ever reached in space, far beyond Apollo missions, which stayed about 110 kilometers above the lunar surface. This mission is a test flight to validate systems ahead of the planned moon landing in 2028. So this is what you'll have to understand. It's a flyby mission. Astronauts are not going to land on the moon. That's what you'll have to understand, the most important point. Because for that, we'll have a different mission in 2028. That's it for this particular news. Let's go to the next column. Coming to the next topic, this is about the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. Now, as the behavior of President Trump is, he has a very fickle attitude. And again, what he has said is that he is going to come out of NATO. Because what he sees is that other partners of NATO are not basically supporting him as far as the fight in the Strait of Hormuz is concerned. Trump has criticized allies' lack of support for Iran war. NATO allies stress unity, urge de-escalation. President Donald Trump said that he was considering pulling the US out of the military alliance due to its European members refusing to send ships to unblock the Strait of Hormuz. NATO, which includes European countries, the United States and Canada, was formed in 1949. And that treaty was Washington Treaty of 1949, with the aim of countering the risk of Soviet attacks, and has been the cornerstone of the West's security ever since. Asked if he was thinking about pulling out of NATO, he said, "Oh, absolutely, without question. Wouldn't you do that if you were me?" So again, it's what tells about his personality, right? NATO's collective defense. Now, this is very important. We have 2 concepts in international relations as far as security goes. We have collective security, where all the members, where all the countries in a global sense, they come together and they basically talk about the peace aspect. They try to maintain the security. And then we have collective defense, which is a more negative aspect, where you have a kind of an alliance among countries, where they say that an attack on one is an attack on all. NATO is the example of collective defense. United Nations is an example of collective security. Please remember that. A concept that lies at the very heart of the alliance. Let's also go through this concept. Collective security and collective defense are 2 important concepts in international relations and security studies. They both involve cooperation among the states, but they serve different purposes and operate under different principles. Collective security, the concept refers to a system where states agree to respond collectively to the threats against any member of the group, regardless of who the aggressor is. The idea is that an attack on one is an attack on all, and thus all members will come to the aid of the attacked state. This principle is often associated with the organizations like United Nations. We have the most important body in the UN, which is the UNSC, United Nations Security Council, which has the mandate with respect to maintaining the international peace and security, right? So it can enforce the actions, where member states commit to maintaining peace and security collectively. Collective defense, this concept is more focused on mutual defense agreements among the states, where members agree to defend each other specifically against external aggression. The most well-known example is NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization of Collective Defense, where an armed attack on one is considered as an attack on all the members. So we have Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, which talks about that, but only in the context of defense against external threat. I have taken these snippets from the NATO website itself, so you can very well refer to them. We have the foundations of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization were officially laid down on 4th of April 1949 with the signing of the North Atlantic Treaty, popularly known as the Washington Treaty. The Washington Treaty or the North Atlantic Treaty forms the very basis of North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The treaty was signed in Washington, D.C. The treaty derives its authority from Article 51 of the UN Charter, which reaffirms the inherent right of the independent states to individual or collective defense. We have Article 5, and it says collective defense, very important point, is at the very heart of the treaty and is enshrined in Article 5. It commits members to protect each other and sets a spirit of solidarity within the alliance. Very important. Let's see the members. We have 32 members. The most important players in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization are the members countries themselves, called NATO allies. So just look at this. We have the inclusion of Finland in 2023, and we also have the inclusion of Sweden. So we had Sweden over here in 2024. So these are the latest countries who have joined the NATO. We have Finland and Sweden. We have had questions on the UPSC with respect to the membership of NATO. So please make sure that you are quite comfortable with the membership. NATO membership is open to any European state in a position, European state, to further the principles of this treaty and to contribute to the security of the North Atlantic area. So I hope this is clear, right? Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, here's a mention of the Cabinet Committee on Security, which is in news because we have had the recent meeting of this particular committee in the context of the West Asian crisis. Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Wednesday chaired a special meeting of the Cabinet Committee on Security to review the measures taken by various ministries regarding the ongoing conflict in West Asia and to also discuss further initiatives to be taken. This was a second special CCS meeting on the matter, the first being on March 22nd. So let's go through this. Can be asked in the prelims. The Cabinet Committee on Security, it is headed by the Prime Minister and is responsible for the important discussions and decisions on defense policy, expenditure, and matters related to the national security. Very important instrument. A committee comparable to the current CCS structure was first formed in independent India in 1947 by the then Prime Minister Pandit Nehru. Formed against the background of the newly independent nation facing national security challenges, it was reportedly chaired by the Prime Minister Pandit Nehru with Home Minister Sardar Patel and Defence Minister Baldev Singh as its member. It was after the 1999 Kargil War that the committee evolved to adopt the present formal structure of the CCS and became a high-powered committee for the defence and national security. Over time, the CCS has evolved into the apex decision-making body concerning the internal and external security matters of the Government of India. Composition: with the Prime Minister as its chairperson, the committee typically comprises the Home Minister, Defence Minister, Finance Minister, and External Affairs Minister. The National Security Advisor acts as a secretary-level coordinator on the matters within its purview. While the Defence Minister is a permanent invitee to the panel, other members may be included as per the requirements. The Cabinet Secretariat is responsible for maintaining records of the meetings and proceedings of the CCS. The CCS concerns itself with the matters related to the defense, foreign affairs, the core element of nation's security, intelligence, nuclear issues, space policy, and major appointments related to the national security. It also is the apex body when it comes to the appointments of the officials in the national security bodies. So please go through this, can be asked in the prelims. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, we have the inauguration of Samprati Museum in Gujarat by the Prime Minister. Now, we had this particular emperor, Samprati, who was basically the grandson of Ashoka. We all know that Ashoka, he took a lot of efforts as far as the spread of Buddhism is concerned. But Samrat Samprati, he basically took efforts as far as the spread of Jainism is concerned. So therefore, it becomes a very important part of history, art and culture. On the occasion of Mahavir Jayanti, Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated the Samprati Museum in Koba, Gandhinagar. The museum is dedicated to Jain history and the life of Samrat Samprati, the grandson of Mauryan ruler Asoka. Unlike Asoka, who is known for helping spread the Buddhism, Samprati is remembered for his deep association with Jainism. Very important factor can be asked in the prelims. The rise and spread of Mauryan Empire in the 3rd century BC. What we saw, that Asoka did a lot of things. He expanded his empire vigorously, right, extensively. Asoka, who ruled from circa 269 to 232 BC, is credited with expanding the empire and later instituting a moral framework grounded in Buddhist virtues. So this is the museum we are talking about. Prime Minister recently inaugurated. Buddhists often regard Asoka as almost single-handedly responsible for the spread of Buddhism beyond the North Indian landscape. Asoka's wives were predominantly Buddhist, but his first wife, Padmavati, was a Jain. Another Mauryan figure central to Jain narratives is Asoka's grandfather, Chandragupta Maurya, who Jain traditions say embraced the faith. The Digambara historians credit him with leading a migration south to avoid the Great Famine and eventually dying in meditation at the holy shrine of Shravana Belgola. Please understand that in Jainism, we have primarily two sects. We have the Digambars and we have Svetambars. Digambars are the sky-clad. So they observe absolute nudity. So they don't cover their body with any cloth because they have a sense of detachment with the worldly things. Then we have the Svetambars, who are known as the white-clad, right? So what they do is they cover their body with white clothes, right? Chandragupta Maurya is venerated, respected in Digambara Jain traditions. For Svetambaras, the central person in the Mauryan dynasty was Ashoka's grandson, successor Samprati, right? So he basically gave emphasis to the Svetambars. Remember that. Empire was divided between his grandson. We have Dasharatha and Samprati. Samprati was the son of Kunala. Jain texts in particular portray him as adherent who played a significant role in the dissemination of Jinnah images across the subcontinent. Played a very important role as far as the Svetambara sect is concerned. Samprati is believed to have reigned between 2030 and 2020. The story of Samprati first emerges in Svetambara writings in the context of the rules of monastic practices. Over time, his legacy grew with anonymous and undated medieval works devoted entirely to him, such as the 461 verse Sanskrit deeds of King Samprati, known as Samprati Nirpa Charitra. Some traditions describe, please remember these things can be asked as a form of literature in the prelims. Some traditions describe Samprati as Jain from birth, but most account emphasize his conversion under the monk Suhastin, the 8th leader of the Jain congregation established by Mahavira, whom he is said to have met in Ujjain. Following his conversion, Samprati is credited with actively promoting Jainism across the subcontinent and beyond, facilitating the movement of monks into distant regions, constructing and renovating thousands of temples and establishing a number of icons. Authors even attribute to him the spread of Jain teachings to regions as far as China, Burma, now Myanmar, Afghanistan, Nepal. More expansive interpretation go further, still crediting him with the extending Jain influence to Central Asia. We have countries like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, right? So all these countries. The Arabian Peninsula and the parts of West Asia, different countries of West Asia. Further, just as Asoka not only spread Buddhist teachings but also instituted the Buddhist ritual culture of stupas throughout these lands, so Samprati did more than sending the missionaries. He also built temples and installed icons all over these Central Asian countries, right? So this is what you'll have to understand, can be asked in the prelims. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the last topic of today's discussion is a mention of the special intensive revision. We know that there have been a lot of debates and discussions regarding the process of the SIR which is being conducted. See, this is known as a special intensive revision. It's a revision of the electoral rules which we have, which has a list of the eligible voters. So there are concerns, there are allegations, especially from the opposition ruled states, that SIR is being done to basically compromise the interests of the minorities or to compromise the interests of those people who vote for the parties who are in opposition to the central government. So let's go through that. SIR refers to the large-scale intensive revision of electoral rules, the revision of the electoral rules by the Election Commission of India under its constitutional and statutory powers. We have Article 324, which gives plenary powers to the Election Commission of India. all-encompassing powers. Usually triggered in anticipation of high-stakes election or when the roles have remained largely unchanged for years, the SIR involves steps such as fresh enumeration forms, house-to-house verification by booth-level officers, document verification of voters, deletion of ineligible entities or entries, and inclusion of those omitted. The SIR 2025 in Bihar, where more than 8 crore voters were to be verified, is the latest example. The legal basis, important, can be asked in the prelims, is in Article 324. The superintendent's direction and control of election is vested with the Election Commission of India, right? And Section 21 subclause 3 of the Representation of People's Act 1950, not 1951, which allows the Commission to carry out the special revision of the electoral rules. The objective is to include every eligible citizen who is more than 18 years of age. We have Article 326, Universal Adult Franchise, and to remove the duplicates, deceased persons who are dead, illegible entries, and correct errors like wrong names. It is not simply a summary revision but combines features of a full enumeration, intensive revision, and summary updates. Hence, nomenclature is special intensive. Then we have special intensive revision significance, reduces the ghost voters and multiple registrations by removing the duplicate entries, reflects demographic changes, large-scale migration, new elector entrants, improves the inclusion of marginalized groups. We have young voters, internal migrants, disabled voters, strengthens the transparency and trust. When voters feel that the list is updated and inclusive, public confidence increases in the overall system, facilitates the efficient polling logistics. Clean rolls help better planning, fewer spoiled ballots, accurate polling stations, and it would lead to the sustainable use of resources. That is what you'll have to understand. That's it from my side. I really hope that you enjoy the discussion. All the very best. Thank you.